Somewhere in your house, there is probably a drawer. And in that drawer, under old cables and dead chargers, there may still be one. A small, heavy, almost indestructible little phone, with a tiny green screen and a game about a snake. For millions of us, it was our very first phone. It belonged to a company that, at its peak, sold nearly 4 out of every 10 phones on the entire planet. A company so dominant that experts believed nothing could ever touch it. And then, in the space of just a few short years, it simply vanished. This is the story of Nokia. How a paper mill from the 1800s became the most powerful phone maker in human history, and how it lost almost everything, not in a sudden crash, but in a fall so strange that business schools still argue about it today. To understand the fall, you first have to understand how unlikely the rise was. Nokia was not born in a Silicon Valley garage. It was born in 1865 beside a freezing river in the forests of Finland, as a single mill that ground wood into paper. Its founder never made a phone call in his life. The telephone had not even been invented yet. For more than a century, Nokia survived by refusing to stay one thing. It made rubber boots. It made car tires. It made cables, raincoats, and even gas masks. By 1967, a handful of these businesses had merged into one strange, stubborn company. And that habit, the habit of reinventing itself again and again, was baked deep into its blood. So when the world slowly began to go wireless, Nokia did what it had always done. It reinvented itself one more time, and this time, it would conquer the world. In the 1990s, Nokia made a bet that would define an entire generation. It threw almost everything else aside and went all in on the mobile phone. The timing was perfect. A new digital standard was sweeping across Europe, and Nokia helped to build it. What came next was domination on a scale that is hard to even imagine now. The Nokia 1100, a simple, cheap, tough little phone, would go on to sell more than 250 million units, making it one of the best-selling devices of any kind ever made. The Nokia 3310 became a legend for being almost impossible to break. By 2005, Nokia had sold its billionth phone. By early 2008, it controlled around 40% of the entire global market. Its brand was one of the most valuable on Earth. In much of the world, the word for mobile phone simply was Nokia. They were the kings. And the kings were not watching the door. In January of 2007, a man in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage in San Francisco, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a single slab of glass. Steve Jobs called it the iPhone. Inside Nokia, the reaction was not panic. It was a shrug. The iPhone had a weak battery. It could not survive being dropped. It sold only a tiny fraction of what Nokia sold every single day. Engineers in Finland looked at it and saw a fragile, overpriced toy for rich Americans. And for a while, they were not entirely wrong. The iPhone really did not outsell Nokia's best phones at first. But they had completely misunderstood what they were looking at. Steve Jobs had not built a better phone. He had built a better computer that happened to make calls. And the ground was already shifting beneath Nokia's feet. The real problem lived deep inside Nokia's phones, in the software that ran them, called Symbian. For years, Symbian had been a weapon. It made Nokia's phones fast, reliable, and cheap to produce by the millions. But Symbian had been designed for a world of buttons, not a world of touch and apps. It was clumsy and painful to write software for. Every new phone seemed to need its own special version of the code. By 2009, Nokia was juggling 57 different, incompatible versions of its own operating system, while Apple built one single, elegant platform and invited the whole world to create apps for it. Nokia was slowly drowning in its own complexity. The developers, the very people building the apps that customers now craved, quietly walked away. Nokia still made beautiful hardware, but the war had moved to a place it could not follow. It had moved into software, and Nokia kept on fighting the last war. To its credit, Nokia knew something was wrong. It had even built touchscreen prototypes years before the iPhone ever appeared. The real tragedy of Nokia is not that it was blind. It is that it saw the danger coming and still could not move. It tried bolting a touch screen onto the old Symbian system. The result felt awkward and slow. It poured a fortune into an iPhone killer called the N8, and the world simply shrugged. It started a promising new system with Intel, then hesitated and starved it of support. Inside the company, teams fought each other. One reorganization followed another. Thousands of brilliant engineers worked at full speed, all in different directions. Nokia had every single resource it needed to win: money, talent, factories, and the most trusted brand in the entire business. What it had lost was the one thing that money can never buy back: time. In 2010, Nokia did something it had never done before in its long history. It hired an outsider to lead it. And not just any outsider. Stephen Elop, the first non-Finnish chief executive Nokia had ever had, came directly from Microsoft. A few months later, Elop sent his employees a memo that would become famous around the world. He told them to imagine a man standing on a burning oil platform in the freezing North Sea, forced to choose between the flames behind him and a terrifying leap into the dark water below. Nokia, he said, was that man. The platform was on fire. Then, on the 11th of February, 2011, he announced his leap. Nokia would abandon its own software entirely. From that day forward, its smartphones would run Microsoft's Windows Phone instead. In a single sentence, he had killed Symbian, killed the new system, and erased decades of Nokia's own work. The market's verdict was instant and brutal. The share price fell by roughly 14% that very day. The great bet did not pay off. Windows Phone was elegant, but it had arrived far too late, into a world already split between Apple and Android, and it had almost no apps of its own. Customers who might once have bought a Nokia simply bought something else. The numbers became a free-fall. Between 2011 and 2013, Nokia's smartphone sales collapsed from first place in the entire world, all the way down to 10th. The layoffs began, and then they never seemed to stop. In Finland, where Nokia had been a source of deep national pride, it felt like watching a beloved family member slowly fade away. And in the quiet hallways of Nokia's headquarters, a dark theory began to spread in whispers. Their new leader had come from Microsoft. He had bet the whole company on Microsoft's software. And when it failed, it would be Microsoft, they suspected, that bought the wreckage for cheap. They even had a name for him: the Trojan horse. And then the whisper came true. In September of 2013, Nokia announced that it was selling its phone business, the heart of the company, the very thing the entire world knew it for. It was selling it to Microsoft. The price was just over $7 billion, and Stephen Elop went back to Microsoft. For a company that had once been worth more than $200 billion, that had sold 1 billion phones, that had been the undisputed king of an entire industry, it was a quiet, almost gentle ending. At the press conference announcing the deal, Nokia's leader is said to have closed with a single, devastating sentence. He looked at everything that was happening to the company he led, and he said, We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. But here is the twist that most people never learn. Nokia did not actually die. The part of it that made the phones was sold, and then shut down by Microsoft within just a couple of years. But Nokia itself, the 150-year-old survivor, the paper mill that became a rubber company, that became a cable company, that became a phone empire, did exactly what it had always done. It reinvented itself one more time. Today, Nokia is quietly one of the largest builders of the network equipment that carries the world's phone calls and internet traffic, including, perhaps, the very signal reaching your device right now. But the real lesson of Nokia is not about phones at all. It is this: you can be the biggest, the richest, the most loved. You can do almost everything by the textbook, exactly right, and you can still lose if the world quietly changes the rules of the game and you keep on playing by the old ones. Nokia did not fall because it was lazy or stupid or poor. It fell because it was certain, and in a world that never, ever stops moving, certainty is the most dangerous thing of all. If stories like this one fascinate you, the giants that once ruled the world, and then vanished, then subscribe, and stay a while. Because there are far more of them than you might think. And every single one of them was once, absolutely, too big to fail.